most corrupt cities in the world, I think.
Yeah, every single precinct was getting $1 million a year.
World War II, the mob made deals with the United States government. The Kennedy family made their fortune off of Prohibition.
I would imagine if they're electing presidents, they're electing mayors too.
They started making a fortune off of bootlegging, or making a fortune from politicians, from police.
From The Godfather to The Sopranos, the Mafia has inspired some of America's greatest lore. But what is their actual story? How did they rise to power? Did they really run New York City? And where are they today? We visited Little Italy with Mafia historian Eric Ferrar to answer these questions and explore the true story behind one of America's greatest fascinations, the Mafia.
Let's go to work.
My family had apartments up on above Anthony's Liquors for about 90 years.
Eric Ferrar is the founder of the Lower East Side History Project and author of several Mafia books.
I knew the real Henry Hill very well. I'm actually writing a book with his last fiancée and manager.
Before Eric could reveal Mafia secrets and tell us what he thinks are the most accurate Mafia portrayals on the big screen, we wanted to learn about the Mafia's origin story right in these streets.
The whole technical Lower East Side, which Little Italy is part of, was a ghetto, and it was a great experiment in human history. People from all over Europe and Asia, for that matter, that never communicated before, or worse, were at war with each other for hundreds of years, and decided to put them in a little 2-mile square tract of land on the Lower East Side of Manhattan Island. This was largely Irish. The Italians started slowly moving in 1870s and 80s, and basically pushed all the Irish out. There was so much discrimination against Italians. We kind of were forced into this little isolated colony, totally untrusting of each other. Outsiders would just let them kill each other. It's not affecting us. So unfortunately, the good, hard-working Italians, which were 99.9% of the population, were at the mercy of these criminals for decades.
In those days, the five families didn't yet exist. Instead, a group called the Black Hand ruled the neighborhood, just like in Godfather 2.
And they were not organized in any level when they first got here. Literally extortionists, that's all they were. They were domestic terrorists. They would terrorize the community. You owned a business, they would write you a letter, saying we want a certain amount of money, and if you didn't pay, they would blow up your store.
The Black Hand was brutal.
They brought barrel murders to America.
What is a barrel murder?
They would kill you, put your body in a barrel, and either place the barrel in front of your family's home to find, or maybe more sadistically, would just go to a phone book or something and pick a random address around America and mail out these dead bodies in barrels.
In the 1920s, the Black Hand lost power as Prohibition minted a new generation of criminals. Criminals like Charlie Lucky Luciano, the Italian-Irish mobster Frank Costello, and the mob's accountant, the Jewish Meyer Lansky.
Prohibition is what came in and solidified everything and organized everything, because they started making a fortune off of bootlegging. They were making a fortune from politicians, from police.
To say that New York City cops were in on Prohibition would be an understatement.
This was an open-air market for alcohol. They would get alcohol from international waters, stock it up in the warehouse on the foot of the bridge, pack trucks, bring it here and distribute it throughout the Northeast. Pick up a rock and throw it, you hit the old police headquarters. Cops had a tunnel that runs into where the O'Neill's is, and so the cops would go right from the precinct under into whatever was going on in O'Neill's.
Prohibition forged relationships between the cops and the Mafia that lasted for decades.
He had all the judges and politicians in his pocket. He refused to share them.
At least up through the 70s and 80s, police were getting kickbacks from all over the place. Yeah, every single precinct was getting $1 million a year. They didn't trust cops that were not dirty. Let's put it that way.
And while the cops were getting rich, so were the mob bosses and their non-Italian partners like Joe Kennedy.
The Kennedy family made their fortune off of Prohibition. So they started forging these relationships with future heavyweight politicians back in the 20s, and it just didn't go away.
One mob boss who made a killing was Joe the Boss Masseria.
He was the premier boss of the Sicilian clan here in New York City by the 1920s. But he lived here with his family on August 9, 1922. He was coming out of his door. He was walking north. We don't know exactly where he was going, but according to witnesses, he only made it a few steps when two guys ran up behind him, yelled, "Guarde, guarde," and when he turned his head, they fired 4 shots at point-blank range. These guys ran out of bullets, and they ran to a waiting getaway car over on East 5th Street. This guy ended up surviving with 2 bullet holes through his straw hat. So the superstitious Sicilians at the time, he was already larger than life, but now he's just almost untouchable. From that point on, we know he had bodyguards. One of the earliest guys that he ended up hiring was a guy named Salvatore Lucania from East 10th Street, and most people would later know him as Charlie Lucky Luciano.
Hiring Lucky Luciano as a gunman proved to be a fatal mistake for the boss, because during one of the mafia wars of the 1920s, Lucky Luciano turned on him and hired gunmen to kill him. Lucky Luciano did that because he struck a deal with Salvatore Maranzano, who then brought together the five families.
They always talk about Charlie Luciano was organizing the five families. It's not true. It's a guy named Salvatore Maranzano. When all this war was going on, when the dust settled, he organized the five families. He took all these warring clans, he put Charlie Luciano in charge of just one family. But eventually Luciano had Maranzano killed, and then he ended up taking over and organizing a commission along with Jewish gangsters and others.
So now it's the 1930s, and Little Italy is no longer run by a decentralized network of Italian clans and the Black Hand. Instead, you have the five families who control all the power, just like in The Godfather.
And I believed that then, and I believe that now.
Times have changed. It's not like the old days.
In real life, the Corleone family didn't exist. Speaking of the five families, who were they?
Of the Genovese organized crime family.
And the godfather of the Gambino family.
Bonanno organized crime family.
Of the Lucchese crime family in New York City.
The Colombo crime family.
Lucky Luciano led the Genovese family, while Costello led the Lucchese family. With the birth of the five families, organized crime in America transformed overnight. The mafia graduated from running gambling rackets and smuggling booze to dominating entire industries, some industries that they still have a hand in.
There's three major industries that they've been in for decades. One is garbage carting. Every commercial business in the city has to pay somebody to pick up garbage. The city only picks up residential garbage, so that's very lucrative. They've had that wrapped up since the 60s. Trucking, importing, construction business.
In the decades that followed, the mob literally built New York City. It provided the concrete and workers that went into constructing buildings like the Empire State Building and the World Trade Center. It also serviced 250,000 businesses with its commercial waste hauling, making $7 to $10 billion annually in the 1960s. That was more than the combined profits of the 10 largest U.S. industrial organizations. And yes, they dominated the shipping ports around New York.
This is Port Newark. We're longshoremen.
Tighten security at the ports. Al-Qaeda.
By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please make sure to subscribe. We go all around the country and capture without bias or fear. We promise to do more deep dives like this one. If you support our mission, please make sure to subscribe and like this video. Now back to Little Italy. At this point, the mob had spread across the U.S., including to Chicago.
So Al Capone's from New York, first of all. They sent him out there to help out the boss at the time, and he just never left. And Al Capone didn't want anything to do with the five families, and the five families didn't want anything to do with Al Capone. From what I understand, Al Capone thought the five families were too structured and didn't want to be under any rules and everything.
So with all this power, you might wonder, how did it get away with it all? Well, a few reasons. One we've already touched on, corruption.
I mean, we're in one of the most corrupt cities in the world, I think, historically. Over 200 years of corruption at least, dating back to the Tammany Hall era. We had brothels everywhere, gambling dens, everything you could possibly imagine. They were all getting a piece of it, so they used the gangs to keep control of the city and make sure the money was flowing and keep order, shadow police, so to speak. And so they developed these relationships very early on. The cops looked the other way a lot of times, and then you had these street gangs that were keeping order.
But it wasn't just corruption. The mob also curried favor with the U.S. government by making deals with Sicily during World War II.
In World War II, the mob made deals with the United States government for surveillance on the coast. First of all, we had German U-boats coming up to the shore, and who ran the coastline, all the ports. The local mob worked out a deal with Sicily to allow an invasion. So that sealed the deal. That's when you get to hanging out with Frank Sinatra at the Copacabana with the cigars, and they were just they got a free ride for a couple decades.
And the Mafia gained even more power after the war by dominating the unions, which played a huge role in politics.
They helped elect William Harding as president. Very corrupt. I mean, they were running unions and all sorts of things by that point. So the unions are huge. I don't know how many there are in America, but probably hundreds of thousands. That's a big voting bloc.
One thing we heard across the country, Erie, Pennsylvania, or Cleveland, Ohio, or Pittsburgh, is the unions would sort of pick a candidate and you'd go down the line for that candidate. And that's changed in recent elections. But a while ago, the union bosses had enormous voting influence.
Yep. Who was influencing them? Yeah.
The Mafia's power became undeniable in the 1960 election when it helped long-shot JFK win the White House through its celebrity and union sway.
With every good wish for a most enjoyable and fruitful convention, signed John F. Kennedy, President of the United States.
and vote for Kennedy.
Vote for Kennedy.
And we'll come out on top.
In the 1960s and 70s, the mob was everywhere, including the unlikeliest of places like gay bars and drag clubs.
So believe it or not, the mob owns and controlled almost every major gay club in New York City. And most people say that's impossible. I watch all these movies and Catholic and conservative, homophobic, all that stuff. Well, that's partially true, I guess, but when it comes to money, there's not a lot of morals, and you have to realize homosexuality is actually illegal in a lot of places in America. But under the mob's protection, meaning they can pay off the raids, they can pay off the judges, it allowed the community to thrive. And they can charge a premium for that service. So the drinks at these clubs were more expensive than at the straight clubs.
The mob was also a little sketchier at this point. On the one hand, it was involved in dirty business like trafficking heroin and pulling off massive heists like the Lufthansa heist as depicted in Goodfellas.
Nobody knows for sure just how much was taken in the daring pre-dawn raid at the Lufthansa cargo terminal at Kennedy Airport. The FBI says $2 million. Port Authority police say $4 million. The city cops say $5. Lufthansa has not said anything, but they promised to break their silence soon.
But it also helped out the neighborhood.
By the time I was 20, we had over 2,400 murders a year in the city. Go look it up, that's a war zone. And yes, everybody says literally it was the safest neighborhood in New York at the time, which is true. Everybody looked out for each other, not just the mob, but we were a tight community. There is some give and take. Besides keeping it safe, let's say somebody needs a communion suit, they can't afford it, can't afford a funeral, whatever, and they help out. I would say it's partially altruistic, but also now you're partially obligated to look out for them as well. So everybody kind of looked out for each other.
But it was around this time that the Mafia's downfall began. How did the Mafia decline and sort of, it still exists today, but how did it fall starting in the 90s?
I don't know how much it fell, and I don't know how much it exists today, let's put it that way. I mean, but I think culture changed. You know, Italians didn't have a lot of options for a very long time, right? So we had civil service, we had factory work, labor jobs, things like that. Since we had other groups come in under us, I think we were elevated a little bit, became educated, more accepted. So we don't have Italian neighborhoods anymore. So the culture has just completely changed. The recruiting pool is not there as it used to be because it's just not as enticing of a career, so to speak, as it used to be.
Eric showed us around many more Mafia sites. He even debunked a few Mafia myths.
That was the Ravenite Social Club up until the 1980s. But it dates back probably to the 1920s with Carlo Gambino. And then my father was raised over here at 247, and he told me this was a drunk tank. It was bars, and he would trade like comic books for like quarters or something. Fugazi scene with, if you ever saw Donnie Brasco, that was filmed at the bar. A lot of other stuff. Oldest butcher shop and last butcher shop in Little Italy. Before that, this was the headquarters of a guy named Joe Masseria.
And to get made, you have to be totally Italian. You have to
go through the ceremony. You have to prove trust. You know, do a few years in prison, not rat. You know, things like that. A lot of people say you got to kill somebody, but that's street stuff. That's not true. You know, there's you talk to Michael Franzese, they say there's gangsters and there's made guys. You know, they had people that were possibly killers and other things, and you had guys that were business.
There was one major issue we had to ask Eric, especially since he's a Mafia consultant for movies like The Great Gatsby and shows like Boardwalk Empire. We wanted to know what was the most accurate Mafia depiction on screen.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
Godfather is the least accurate, or one of the least. The storytelling and everything's great. Like just the storyline is not like all of a sudden Robert De Niro like kills the Black Hand one day, and next day is the boss. Like that stuff doesn't happen. You know, there's just a lot of inconsistencies. It's a great movie, but storyline is just
not as realistic.
Yeah. Probably the most accurate is probably The Sopranos.
I have the money.
You do? Give the union a call and see if this gentleman here has paid up his union dues, and then pop one of these wheel covers. We'll check the brake pads.
Even though it's kind of clownish because it has to be entertaining, it's probably one of the most accurate telling of a modern mafia organization. And it's very subtle. They don't come out and say it, but if you notice things like the only guys living in the big houses are Tony, the boss, and the underboss of the New York family. Everybody else have these kind of little crappy places and struggling at one point or another.
In our tour with Eric, what became clear is that we were only scratching the surface here. We had barely gotten into the inner workings of the five families, the political involvement of the mob, the scale of their business, and more. And if you want more information on that, take a tour with Eric next time you're in New York. We link to his website in the description. But what was clear is that just like the auto industry helped build Detroit, and the steel industry helped build Pittsburgh, the Mafia really did help build New York City. And as usual, we'd love to hear from you in the comments, especially all of you longtime New Yorkers who've seen Little Italy evolve over the years. Let us know what you think, and thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to subscribe.